So within this lesson, I wanted to talk about tables. So tables are still an important part of developing HTML, and we can see here within the editor. So I'd like to just show you how the editor works and how it uses tables. So with the editor, of course, it's a lot easier to create the code for the table, and we can see here we've got some options here where we can insert cells, rows, columns, and really format the table. But the idea with tables is it's always good to kind of start out with a square, equally shaped rectangular format for tables. So we have a bunch of columns and a bunch of rows, and we don't have any rows maybe if we want to have this row going entirely across. So we would update the attributes of that row in order to accommodate that. So we start out with a basic table to accommodate that. So we start out with a basic table, and I'm just going to do a 4x3 table. So you see here when we go into our source code, this is built up our table here, and the tables, much like what we're doing with the lists, we've got our main table, we've got our table body, and now with HTML5 we've got table heads as well. And this is going to work the same way as what we're looking at in the parent structure of HTML, where we've got our head section. So these are for headers for the columns, and then of course we've got the body. And depending on the browser, again, they're going to translate those differently. So essentially it opens up with table, and this defines the table element, and then table rows, the TRs, these are table rows. So these indicate for each row, and then the TDs are the columns for each row. And as I mentioned, if you want to have a column that spans more than one row, so we can update that by doing something like call span. So we give it a span of 2, and then when we update this, we should add some borders to that as well. So table properties, and I'm going to add a border into there just so that we can actually see the table. Maybe I have to do this. I got to set a border color here, so I'm just going to set it as black. We also have a background color. I'm just going to go to the source code, and I'm going to bring all of this out into my page. So here I've got a border, I've got a background color, so it actually sets some styling information. So again, this can be done with CSS, or it can be done by default within the border, the table attributes as a border. So essentially a basic table, I'm going to create a basic table first from scratch, and then I'll just show you how we can add various attributes into it. So initially we've got our table open, table or close. We've got our first row, and then the number of columns that we want to make within that row, and they're all TDs. So maybe I'll just do it 2 columns because I don't want to really type out too much content here. And TR. Again, remember always to close those off. And now I can just do a simple copy and paste. So this will essentially, this will give me a table with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cells. So I can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so that we can actually see something. Go out and refresh the page, and there we have our table. So I do want to set a border around this so that it is actually visible, because a table by default has no border, and so we do, if we want to be able to see the cells, we can set a border. So going into the code, table border, and I'm just going to equal it to 1. So this will give me a 1 pixel border. So this, as you can see, this is slightly different styling than we see within the editor, because it's applied the border via style. So this is using a CSS method in order to get the styling, whereas over here I'm just applying the border directly to the table. So it is probably a better idea to use CSS in order to actually get styling on your table. So I only added that border just because I don't want to I want to stick with HTML instead of going into actual styling. And I'll show you quickly how to add styling as well in the later lessons. So similar to what we did here, so if I wanted to make the 1 and 2, so basically I just wanted us to be able to see how the borders or how the table is structured. So if I do something like call span equals 2, and I can erase this part here, we're going to refresh it, and we see that now I've got an entire span across. And this is what I meant by start with your initial table structure, have all of the cells available, and then work within those call spans in order to make it go across. You also have an option for a row span, and then that's works similar fashion to the call span, and that gives you the ability to combine multiple rows together and really build out your table. And then along with table, you do have an option for width as well. So I can do something like 500 or something like that to give it a wider width, and I can work with it within the table attributes. And then of course it always is better to do it styling, but again, this was just to demonstrate how you can actually structure your table using the actually built-in defaults within table. And the other thing about the attributes is you can apply attributes only to the one cell level as well. So if you wanted to do, you can't do it within this type of format as a default attribute. So I'll just show you what happens here. We notice that it actually doesn't get applied, and in this type of situation you'd need to do it within styling. And this within this, I'm also going to quickly introduce styling. So with any HTML attribute or any HTML element, you can apply its own styling to it. So it's the same way as applying these attributes, but this is going to be CSS instead of actual HTML. So we get rid of those equal signs, we get that colon instead, and I'm going to apply a border of 1 pic solid black and save that. And now when I refresh it, I see that I've got that styling applied. And styling, as I said, can be applied to any, it's not specific to any particular piece of HTML. You can apply style to any one of these elements. So I can apply that border to there. I can apply, meant actually to apply it up here at the top. So this gives us that entire styling for the entire table. And we noticed too, one other thing that I did want to note, and the reason I did introduce that styling is that notice that when I take the border for applying it for this particular element, so the table element, it's only applying the border to that element as opposed to applying the border for all of the pieces within the table. So that's something to make note of, and that's one of the big differences from doing border 1 to doing border in style, is that when we do border in style, it applies that border to every single cell within the table. And when we do a border in style, it only applies it to that entire table element, so everything outside of there. But it doesn't necessarily translate it to the different elements that are within the table.